Good morning, shelter. It is 6 a.m., so you know what that means. It's our daily 6 at 6. And we've been continuing on with our series of Is It Living, and we've been discussing nutrition. Now, when we're talking about nutrition, we're talking about not only just our minds and our bodies, but most importantly, our spirit. And what it means to have an alive spirit, not only in our Christian walk with Jesus, but also just in an everyday presence. There is something that when we are actively living out our faith, that God is moving in us in ways that we didn't think were possible before. As we're drawing close to Him, He's going to draw near to us. And so I want to continue on this series today, and I want to talk about a little bit more of a harder topic. It's one that every single human being on planet Earth has had to deal with, including Jesus on several different occasions. And so it's this idea of forgiveness. Now, I'd say, Chris, like, what do you mean? Like, I thought these are things that we're supposed to intake. And I promise you, forgiveness is something that you have to intake almost daily. The scripture is very clear on how forgiveness is set up and how if we have unforgiveness in our hearts, how this poison is going to literally draw into our lives. Because when we hold stuff in, when we refuse to forgive other people, or more importantly, because it's happened to me, not asking for forgiveness for myself, there is this guilt, this shame, this hurt, this pain that unforgiveness causes in our life. And as we learned yesterday from fellowship, if the removal of something is negative, then we can add something into it. And if we add forgiveness into our life, guys, this is going to make us feel much more alive. So I want to start off in the book of Matthew, chapter 6, verses 14 and 15, where Jesus gives a very clear value of what it takes to be forgiven. And it's the first step of you actually forgiving other people. See, what Jesus is saying here in these two verses is that if we hold unforgiveness for people who have wronged us, God's going to hold back His forgiveness on us. Now, I don't know about you, but I carry enough sin in my life that I do not want to be living with unforgiveness. So I have to actively take a step to forgive other individuals. And if I know that God's not going to forgive me for my transgressions if I don't forgive others, I need to be very mindful about what I'm asking God for. And the whole book of the Gospels are filled with this, but let's just stick within Matthew. And if we go even just a little bit further, because sometimes there are certain people in our lives that have hurt us, but they don't realize it. And there's even a point in scripture in Matthew chapter 18 where God even recognizes this, where He basically says, take it to the person, go directly to them. But even if they don't listen, then bring somebody else. See, forgiveness can be almost a fellowship. It can be a communal thing that takes place because, when somebody else wrongs us and we want to acknowledge their transgression for us, God has given us directions on how to handle those things. And it means handling that person, that individual, that hurt, that pain directly. See, God doesn't want us to always just sit back. But when you directly bring it to Him, sometimes people didn't know that they hurt you. And there's so many people who are not actively looking to hurt other people, and they don't know that they've been wronged by them. And you may not know that you've wronged somebody else. So when they come to you, you're like, oh my gosh, I didn't know I hurt you that way. And resolutions happen outside of our mind where we draw up these fantasies inside of our head that person was vengeful and hurtful on purpose. And we don't always know that that's the case. So if we directly go to them, we can actually figure it out for ourselves. And there's this idea of how much forgiveness? Because some people are just so hard to forgive. They hurt us so bad. What they did to us was so bad. How long? And Jesus even gives a story for that a little bit later on in Matthew chapter 18, verses 21 and 22, where someone actually brings that question to Him, and He's like, well, 7 times? And Jesus goes, no, 7 times, 70 times. See, what I've learned in my walk with God is that forgiveness is not only a daily practice of nutritional value for us that is going to make us more alive, but it's a lifelong practice. It's a lifelong practice that we need to actively forgive ourselves for the things and the mistakes that we make. But we also have to keep in mind that when somebody hurts us, when somebody does something to us, it's gonna take a long time to heal. And I know this is what God's talking about with the number of 420. See, God knows that a one and done is not the way that it's going to be, because you'll be walking down the street and you'll think you're over it. You haven't seen that person in a few months, but then you see him walking on the other side and that drop in your stomach happens. And I know it's in that moments right there where God is saying one more time. You think you've done it a few hundred times. You need to continually let them go and let God work in them and also in us. Guys, I cannot tell you how much this has changed my life for the people who have hurt me the most. And I encourage you to actively look into Scripture and see what it's telling you. Now, as always, guys, we love you, but most importantly, this distance thing, it's coming to an end. On June 7th, we are going to be gathering. We're going to have a fellowship, and we can forgive each other for all the things of not calling in and not going into my Zoom chats and not doing this and not doing that. Guys, we are going to have a great time on June 7th. So please, please, please invite somebody. If you've been talking to somebody through these, if you've been sharing and someone has been asking you a question, this is the time, this is the season to come together and fellowship. As always, guys, we love you and we cannot wait to see you in person on June 7th.